Cold wind blew through the narrow streets, carrying the smell of wet metal and stale food. Neon lights flickered on broken signs, painting the walls in pale blue and sick green. Lyra kept her head down, one hand holding her daughter Rini's small fingers tightly. The girl's bare feet made soft slapping sounds on the wet ground. Her thin coat could not keep the chill away, and her lips trembled with every breath. They had been walking since morning. Lyra's legs ached, but she could not stop. Every door she had knocked on today had been shut in her face. In one shop, the owner had taken one look at the faint clan mark on her cheek and told her to leave before she brought bad luck to his business. In another, they had laughed openly and told her they didn't hire cursed widows. She had no money left, no food, and no friends in this city. Rini tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, I'm hungry," she whispered, her voice so small it almost broke Lyra's heart. Lyra looked toward a steaming food stall where an alien cook was serving bowls of hot soup. She stepped closer, but the cook's eyes narrowed when he saw her mark. He turned his back and spoke loudly to another customer, ignoring her completely. She stood there for a moment, the smell of the soup twisting her stomach before turning away. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Rini shivered, pressing against her mother's leg. Lyra tried to shield her with her own body, but her coat was thin and soaked quickly. They walked past rows of metal crates, most of them stacked high beside closed warehouses. The street was quieter here, but not safer. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting trouble. A man was watching them from the corner of the street. He was taller than most aliens around, with pale skin and dark hair. His clothes were simple but clean, and his eyes followed Lyra and Rini. When their eyes met for a moment, she quickly looked away. Humans were rare here, and in her experience, rare meant dangerous. Rini stumbled on a loose metal plate, falling to her knees. Lyra knelt quickly, helping her up. The girl's knees were scraped, and tiny beads of blood formed. Lyra tore a piece of her own sleeve to wipe it clean. The man had started walking toward them. She pulled Rini behind her, ready to keep moving. Before he could reach them, 3 figures stepped out from a side alley. They were aliens with dark, ridged skin, their eyes glowing faintly in the rain. One of them carried a blunt weapon on his shoulder. The tallest one looked at the human man and smirked. "Walk away, human," the leader said, his voice rough like gravel. "She's cursed. Her bad luck isn't your problem." The human stopped but didn't back away. His eyes moved from Lyra to Rini, then back to the leader. "Doesn't look like luck to me. Looks like a mother and child." The leader's smirk faded. "You don't understand how things work here. She brings ruin to anyone near her. Leave now." Rini clung to her mother's leg, hiding her face. Lyra felt her heartbeat quicken. She had seen how quickly these street thugs could turn violent. She wanted to tell the human to go, to avoid trouble, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. The human took another step forward. Rain dripped from his hair, running down his jaw. "If they're your problem," he said, "then I guess I just made them mine." The leader's grip tightened on his weapon. The other 2 shifted, ready for a fight. Lyra's stomach twisted in fear. If violence started, Rini could be hurt. She thought about running, but the thugs were blocking the path, and the human was in their way. One of the thugs spat on the ground. "You'll regret this, off-worlder." He nodded to the others, and they slowly stepped aside, though their eyes stayed on Lyra. As they passed, the leader leaned close to her ear. "Next time, no one will be here to help you." His breath was hot and foul, making her skin crawl. When they were gone, the human knelt in front of Rini. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Rini peeked at him, her eyes wide, then shook her head. Lyra stepped between them, unsure if she could trust him. "You shouldn't have interfered," she said quietly. "Now they'll come for you too." "Maybe," he said, standing again, "but it looked like you could use some help." Lyra didn't answer. She didn't know what to make of him. He didn't look like a merchant or a soldier. His voice was calm, but there was something unshakable in it. The rain fell harder, and he glanced around. "You have somewhere to go?" She hesitated, then shook her head. The truth was, she didn't even have a place to sleep tonight. "Come on," he said, then tilting his head toward the brighter streets ahead. "You can't stay out here." Lyra stared at him, then down at Rini, who was looking up at her with tired eyes. Part of her screamed not to trust strangers, especially humans. But the other part knew she had no choice. She nodded slightly. As they walked together, neither noticed the shadow watching from the rooftops. A small device clicked softly in the rain as a message was sent. The human is protecting her. Tell the boss. Evan led them through the maze of narrow streets, his long strides slowing so Rini could keep up. The rain softened, turning into a fine mist that clung to their clothes. They passed rows of closed shops, each one dim behind metal shutters. Lyra kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes searching for the thugs. She did not see them, but the uneasy feeling stayed in her chest. They reached a small corner shop with a faded sign and a half-lit window. The door opened with a creak, and warm air drifted out, carrying the faint smell of metal polish and dried herbs. Inside, shelves lined the walls, stacked with tools, small machines, and boxes of trade goods. A counter sat near the window, its surface clean but worn from years of use. Evan motioned for them to come in. "Close the door," he said. Rini stepped inside first, her bare feet making almost no sound on the wooden floor. Lyra followed, still unsure why this man was helping them. Evan pulled a blanket from a chair and handed it to Rini. She wrapped it tightly around herself, her eyes wide as she looked around at the strange objects on the shelves. "You live here?" Lyra asked. "Upstairs," he replied, pointing to a narrow staircase at the back. "The shop's mine. Bought it 2 months ago when I came to this city." Lyra's eyes lingered on the counter. "What do you sell?" "Bits and parts. Tools, cargo handling gear," Evan said. "Enough to keep the lights on." He opened a cupboard and pulled out a small loaf of bread and a sealed jar. "You both look like you haven't eaten in a while." Lyra stiffened. "We're not begging." "I didn't say you were," he replied evenly, cutting the bread. "I'm offering. You can repay me if you want." She hesitated, then took the bread and gave it to Rini. The girl tore off a piece and chewed slowly, like she was afraid it might disappear if she ate too fast. Evan watched quietly, leaning on the counter. After a few moments, he said, "I could use help in the shop, someone to keep things tidy, sort inventory, maybe handle customers when I'm busy." Lyra looked at him sharply. "Why me? You don't know me." "I saw you in the street," he said simply. "You didn't beg, you didn't steal, you kept walking. That tells me enough." Her mouth tightened. "If you hire me, people will stop buying from you. They'll say the curse will touch your goods." He shrugged. "Let them talk." She studied him for a long moment. His expression was steady, his eyes calm. Something about him didn't fit in this city. He wasn't moving with the cold caution of its people. She wanted to believe him, but life had taught her not to trust too quickly. "Just one day," he said. "If it doesn't work, we part ways." Rini's small voice broke the silence. "Mama, please." Lyra looked down at her daughter, then back at Evan. She nodded once. "One day." Evan smiled faintly. "Good. You can start tomorrow morning." The sound of footsteps outside made them both turn toward the door. A shadow passed by the window, pausing for a heartbeat before moving on. Lyra's hand instinctively went to Rini's shoulder. Evan walked to the door, opened it, and looked out into the street. The figure was gone, but the damp footprints on the stones showed they had been standing there for some time. When he came back inside, Lyra was watching him. "They followed us?" "Maybe," he said, "but they didn't come in." She frowned. "They won't stop. Those men, they're not the kind who forget." Evan didn't answer right away. He closed the door, turned the lock, and lowered the blinds. "Then we'll be ready." Upstairs, the small living quarters were simple: a bed, a table, and a shelf with a few books and tools. He set out a folded blanket on the couch for Rini and handed Lyra a dry towel. "It's not much," he said, "but it's warm." Lyra sat on the edge of the couch while Rini curled under the blanket. The little girl was asleep within minutes, her breathing soft and steady. Evan poured 2 cups of hot tea and set one in front of Lyra. "You said they call you cursed," he said quietly. "Why?" Her eyes darkened. "Because I'm from a mining clan that lost everything. My husband died in an accident. At least that's what they called it. But I know it was no accident. The ones responsible didn't want the truth to spread. Now no one will hire me, and they make sure of it." Evan leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "That explains the way they looked at you." "It explains why you should stay away from me," she said. "If you keep me here, they'll turn on you too." He took a sip of tea. "I can handle myself." She shook her head. "You don't know this city." He met her gaze. "Maybe not. But I know when something's wrong, and letting you walk back into the rain tonight would be wrong." Down on the street, the shadow returned, standing in the same spot as before. A faint click came from the small device in his hand. His voice was low as he spoke into it. The human took her in. He's keeping her safe. Tell the boss. Morning light filtered through the dusty shop windows, casting thin lines across the wooden floor. Lyra stood behind the counter, her hands folded in front of her, trying to look calm even though her stomach was tight with nerves. Rini sat on a small stool in the corner, playing quietly with a piece of string Evan had given her. Evan moved between the shelves, checking boxes and restocking items. "If a customer comes in," he said, "just greet them and point them to what they need. If you don't know, call me." Lyra nodded. She had worked before, years ago, but never in a place like this. Every noise from outside made her glance toward the door. She kept remembering the shadow she had seen last night, the feeling of eyes on her. The door's bell jingled, and the first customer of the day stepped in, an alien woman with thin, glassy skin and long, black robes. She paused in the doorway when she saw Lyra. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips curled. "You," she said sharply, "what are you doing here?" Lyra straightened her back. "Working." The woman snorted and moved toward the shelves without another word, but her voice carried as she muttered to herself, "Bad luck. The human must not know." She bought a small tool and paid without looking at Lyra, handing the coins to Evan instead. When she left, the doorbell's sound seemed louder than before. "You handled that fine," Evan said. "Don't let it get to you." But the whispers didn't stop. As the morning passed, more customers came in, some staring openly, others pretending not to notice but stealing glances at the mark on her cheek. 2 young alien men walked in laughing, and one said loudly, "Guess the human's business wasn't bad enough. Now he's cursed it himself." Evan turned toward them, his voice calm but firm. "Buy something or leave." The laughter faded, and they walked out without buying anything. Lyra kept her eyes on the counter, forcing herself not to react. By midday, the shop had a steady flow of customers. Lyra moved between shelves, sorting items and keeping things neat. She began to notice Evan's way of working. He was quick but never rushed, polite but never too soft. He treated every customer the same, no matter their species. Rini came up to the counter holding a tiny flower she had found in a crack near the wall outside. She placed it carefully on the counter in front of Lyra. "For you, Mama," she said with a shy smile. Lyra's chest warmed, and for a moment she forgot the stares, the whispers, the fear. She touched Rini's hair gently. "Thank you, little one." The bell rang again, but this time the air in the shop seemed to change. An alien officer stepped inside, his armor black and polished, his badge glinting under the light. His gaze swept the shop and settled on Lyra. He walked to the counter slowly, each step deliberate. "Human," he said to Evan, "do you know who you've brought into your business?" "I know enough," Evan replied. The officer's thin lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer. "She's a problem. A marked widow from a cursed clan. People will avoid your shop, your profit will vanish. You should send her away before her bad luck reaches you." Evan didn't move from where he stood. "She works here now. That's not changing." The officer studied him for a moment, as if weighing his words. Then he leaned slightly closer. "Don't cry later when both of you disappear." Lyra's hands tightened on the counter. Rini's eyes darted between them, sensing the tension. Evan's voice didn't change, but his jaw tightened. "We'll take our chances." The officer gave a small, humorless laugh and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he looked at Lyra one last time. "Some people are worth saving. She isn't one of them." The bell jingled as the door closed behind him. Silence filled the shop. Rini shifted closer to her mother, holding onto her arm. Lyra looked at Evan. "You shouldn't have said that. Now you're in danger too." "I'm not afraid of him," Evan said, "and you shouldn't be either." But Lyra couldn't believe that. She knew how power worked in this city. Officers didn't give warnings for no reason. They gave them so they could later say they had been ignored. Business slowed in the afternoon. Lyra noticed fewer customers stepping inside. Those who did rarely stayed long. By closing time, the shop felt heavier, as if the officer's words had soaked into the walls. Evan locked the door and began counting the coins in the register. "First day wasn't bad," he said. Lyra shook her head. "You saw how they looked at me. You'll lose everything if I stay." "Maybe," he said, "but some things matter more than coins." She stared at him, unsure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Upstairs, Rini had already fallen asleep on the couch, clutching the blanket. Lyra stood at the window, looking down at the dark street. Somewhere out there, she felt the shadow still watching, patient and silent. In an alley across the street, the same figure from before lowered a communicator from his mouth. His voice was flat. The human refuses to let her go. The boss won't like that. The night was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic from the upper city. Evan sat at the small table upstairs, fixing a loose part from one of the shop's machines. Lyra sat near the couch where Rini slept, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. She could not relax. Every creak of the floorboards or whisper of wind against the windows made her look toward the door. "You're thinking about what that officer said," Evan said without looking up from his work. Lyra's voice was low. "He doesn't make idle threats. If he warned you, it means something is already in motion." Evan set the part aside and leaned back in his chair. "If I send you away, what happens? You go back to sleeping in the streets? Those thugs find you alone?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Better me than you. You have a shop, a life here. You shouldn't risk it." "I'll decide what I risk," he said simply. The wind outside picked up, rattling the shutters. Lyra stood and walked to the window. Across the street, under the dim yellow glow of a street lamp, she saw movement. A figure leaned against the wall, his face hidden in shadow. Her stomach tightened. "They're watching," she whispered. Evan came to stand beside her, following her gaze. The figure didn't move, didn't run, just stayed there. Then slowly he stepped back into the darkness and was gone. Evan closed the curtains, locked the door downstairs, doubled the bolts. Lyra did as he said, her hands trembling slightly. The shop was silent again, but the silence felt heavy. She stayed awake long after Rini had drifted into deep sleep, her thoughts twisting into knots. Morning came gray and damp. The air was thick with the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Lyra moved through the shop, sweeping the floor and dusting the shelves. Evan checked shipments in the back. There were fewer customers than yesterday, and the ones who came in seemed rushed, avoiding eye contact with her. By late afternoon, a small clinking sound drew Lyra's attention. Something had rolled across the floor from under the door, a smooth black stone with a faint red mark painted on it. She bent down, her breath catching. She knew that mark. It was a warning from the street clans, a sign that trouble was coming. Evan came from the back, saw the stone in her hand, and frowned. "What is it?" "A message," she said, her voice tight. "They're giving you one last chance." Before she could explain further, glass shattered. A rock flew through the front window, spraying shards across the counter. Lyra flinched, instinctively pulling Rini behind her. The rock landed on the floor, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. Evan picked it up and unwrapped it. The cloth had 3 words scrawled in jagged ink. "Last chance. Human." Evan's jaw set. "That's it." He moved to the door and locked it, and then began boarding up the broken window with spare planks from the storeroom. "You should send us away," Lyra said again, her voice breaking. "They will destroy this place. You don't know how far they'll go." "I told you," he said without looking at her. "I don't abandon people who need help." Ronnie peered out from behind her mother. "Mama, I'm scared." Lyra knelt beside her, brushing a hand through her hair. "It's all right," she lied. "We'll be fine." But inside, she knew the danger was growing. That night, Evan insisted they sleep upstairs. He moved the couch against the door and kept a heavy wrench beside his chair. Lyra lay awake, listening to every sound from the street below. Somewhere in the early hours, she heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate steps moving across the shop's front porch. A faint scratching noise followed, like metal on wood. Then silence. Evan's eyes were open in the dim light. He had heard it too. He motioned for her to stay quiet, then crept to the window. Peeking through the smallest gap in the curtain, he saw a shadow moving away toward the corner of the street. When he returned, his voice was a whisper. "They're scouting the place, testing how close they can get without me coming out." Lyra's hands clenched in the blanket. "They won't stop now." In a dark alley 2 streets away, the same figure from before pulled a communicator from his pocket. Rain began to fall in thin drops, pattering against the metal roofs. His voice was low but certain. "She's still there. The humans protecting her. Prepare the grab." Far from the shop, another voice answered through static. "Tomorrow night. No mistakes." The figure closed the communicator and melted back into the shadows, the rain hiding his footsteps. Upstairs, unaware of the exact plan but knowing danger was close, Lyra lay awake until dawn, listening to the rain and wondering if this human had made the worst mistake of his life by trying to help her. The rain had stopped, but the streets outside were slick and dark. Evan moved through the shop in silence, checking the locks twice before turning off the lights. Upstairs, Rini was already asleep on the couch, curled up under the blanket. Lyra sat near her, pretending to read a small book, but her eyes kept shifting toward the door. She could feel it. The quiet tonight wasn't safe. It was the kind of stillness that came before something bad. Evan sat by the window, peering through a small gap in the curtain at the empty street. "If they come," he said, "don't try to run into the street. Too many places for them to corner you. Stay upstairs, keep Rini close." Lyra's throat felt tight. "And you?" "I'll deal with them," he said simply. The hours dragged. The city's noise faded, leaving only the faint hum of distant generators. Somewhere in the distance, a metal door slammed, echoing through the narrow alleys. Evan's grip on the wrench beside him tightened. It happened fast. The front door burst open with a crash, the lock snapping under the force. 3 figures rushed inside, their faces hidden under dark masks. Lyra grabbed Rini, pulling her back toward the stairs. One of the attackers lunged for her, but Evan was already moving. The wrench in his hand swung hard, striking the side of the man's head with a dull thud. He stumbled, crashing into a shelf. Another attacker came at him from the side, swinging a short blade. Evan ducked, driving his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him to the floor. The third masked figure ignored Evan and went straight for Lyra. She tried to push Rini behind her, but his arm caught her by the wrist, pulling hard. Evan grabbed the man's collar from behind and yanked him away, slamming him against the wall. The impact shook the shelves, scattering small tools and boxes onto the floor. "Get upstairs!" Evan shouted over his shoulder. Lyra didn't argue. She pulled Rini up the narrow staircase, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear anything else. Behind her, the sounds of the fight echoed. Grunts, the scrape of boots on wood, the crash of something breaking. One of the attackers managed to shove Evan back, giving them space. "You don't understand, human," he growled through the mask. "She's not worth dying for." Evan wiped blood from the corner of his mouth and stepped forward again. "That's my choice." The man lunged, but Evan sidestepped, grabbing his arm and twisting until the blade clattered to the floor. He shoved him into the others, forcing them toward the door. "Get out," he barked. "Next time, you won't walk away." The 3 exchanged a look, then backed toward the street. One spat on the floor before leaving. The door slammed behind them, and silence fell. Evan locked the broken door as best he could and went upstairs. Lyra was sitting on the couch with Rini in her arms. The girl was shaking, her small hands clutching at her mother's clothes. "They're gone," Evan said, his voice steady despite the small cut on his cheek and the bruise forming along his jaw. Lyra looked at him with wide eyes. "Why would you do that? You could have been killed." "Because you needed help," he said simply. Her gaze lowered. "No one's ever stood up for me like that." He sat on the edge of the table. "Maybe no one's tried because they were afraid. But fear's not a reason to let people suffer." For a moment, the only sound was Rini's soft breathing. Then Lyra's voice came again, quieter. "You don't know the whole truth." Evan looked at her, waiting. "My husband didn't just die in an accident," she said. "He worked in the deep mines owned by one of the richest families in the sector. There was an explosion. He found out it was caused by faulty equipment they refused to replace. They were hiding it, and he was going to speak out. He never got the chance. After he died, they made sure everyone believed I was cursed, so no one would listen to me." Evan's eyes narrowed. "And those men tonight? They work for that family," she said. "They've been hunting me ever since to make sure I never speak about what happened. That's why they don't want anyone to help me. If you keep me here, they'll come again. They won't stop until..." Her voice trailed off, and she hugged Rini tighter. Evan leaned forward. "Then we make sure they can't come again." Lyra shook her head. "You can't fight them. They own the streets, the guards, even the council." "Maybe," he said, "but every power has a weakness." Down in the dark streets, the 3 masked men were already reporting back. In a cramped room lit by a single flickering bulb, their leader listened with cold eyes. When they finished, he spoke into a communicator. The human interfered again. He's protecting her. Tell the family and tell them we move to the next step. Far away in a brightly lit tower, a voice answered with quiet menace. Bring them both. Alive. The next morning, the air in the shop felt heavy, as if danger itself had seeped through the walls overnight. Evan worked in silence, fixing a broken latch on the counter display, while Lyra moved quietly around the shelves, her eyes darting toward the windows every few minutes. Renee sat on her stool with her knees pulled to her chest, too quiet for a child her age. Evan finally set his tools down. We can't keep waiting for them to make the next move, he said. Lyra's voice was low. What do you mean? We find proof of what happened to your husband. If we can show the council, they'll have to act. Her mouth tightened. The council doesn't care about people like us. The family pays them. Maybe. But if the proof is public, they can't bury it, he said. Where would we find it? She hesitated. In the mining docks. There's a control room where they keep shipment logs and safety reports. If anything was hidden, it's there. But it's guarded day and night. Then we'll have to be careful, Evan said. By nightfall, they were ready. Evan had packed a small bag with tools, a light, and a data chip for storing whatever files they could find. He left Riney with a trusted neighbor who owed him a favor, promising to be back before morning. Lyra kissed her daughter's head, forcing a smile she didn't feel, then followed Evan into the damp streets. The mining docks loomed ahead, massive steel gates opening onto rows of towering cargo ships. Cranes moved like slow metal insects above them, their lights sweeping the fog. Evan led Lyra along the outer fence until they found a section with loose panels. He pried one open just enough for them to slip inside. The air smelled of oil and burning fuel. They moved between stacks of crates, staying in the shadows. A guard's footsteps echoed nearby, and they pressed against the cold metal until he passed. The control room was a squat building at the edge of the docks, its windows glowing faintly. Evan picked the side door lock in seconds, and they slipped inside. The hum of machinery filled the room, rows of screens displaying cargo schedules and shipment manifests. Lyra went to one of the terminals, her hands shaking as she typed. These logs go back years, she whispered. Look, here, the day of the explosion. Evan leaned over her shoulder. The report showed a safety inspection marked as passed, but a hidden file beneath it told a different story. The equipment had been flagged as dangerous, and the family had ordered the report altered. This is it, he said. Copy everything. She slid the data chip into the terminal, the progress bar slowly filling. Outside, voices rose, sharp, urgent voices. They know we're here, Evan said. The chip clicked as it finished, and Lyra pulled it free. They headed for the door, but the moment Evan stepped outside, a shout rang out. 4 guards emerged from the fog, weapons raised. This is private property, one barked. Evan didn't slow. Run! He shouted to Lyra. She bolted toward the crates, clutching the chip. Evan swung his bag at the nearest guard, knocking him off balance, then ducked behind a container. 2 of the guards gave chase after Lyra, their boots pounding on the metal deck. Lyra darted between crates, her breath loud in her ears. She could hear the guards closing in. One reached for her arm, but Evan appeared from the side, slamming into him and sending them both sprawling. The second guard raised his weapon toward Lyra. Her steps faltered, fear freezing her in place. But before he could fire, Evan tackled him, wrenching the weapon away and throwing it into the shadows. They ran, weaving through the maze of containers until they reached the loose fence panel. Evan pushed Lyra through first, then followed, their breath clouding in the cold night air. They didn't stop running until the docks were far behind. Only then did Evan slow, his chest heaving. Did you get it? Lyra held up the chip. Every file, every report, enough to ruin them if it gets out. Evan's expression hardened. Then we make sure it does. But as they turned onto the street leading back to the shop, a tall figure stepped from the shadows, blocking their way. He was dressed in dark armor, the family's crest on his chest. In his hand, a sleek weapon glinted under the streetlight. You've caused a lot of trouble, the man said, his voice calm but deadly. His gaze slid to Lyra, then to the chip in her hand. That belongs to us. Evan moved in front of her. You'll have to kill me first. The man smiled faintly, raising the weapon. That can be arranged. Before he could fire, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the other end of the street. More of them were coming, their armor clinking in the dark. Lyra's grip tightened on the chip as her heart pounded in her ears. Evan stepped sideways, keeping himself between Lyra and the man with the weapon. The street felt narrower now, the dim lights flickering above them. From behind, the sound of boots grew louder. They were being closed in. Lyra's fingers tightened around the chip in her palm. She knew if they lost it, everything would have been for nothing. Evan's voice was steady when he spoke. "You don't want to do this. You shoot. The council will notice." The armored man smirked. "The council notices what we tell them to notice." From the far end of the street, 4 more figures appeared, their armor glinting under the light. The leader gave a small nod. "Take them alive." 2 of the guards rushed forward. Evan grabbed a loose piece of metal pipe from the ground and swung it hard, knocking the first one back. The second lunged, but Evan sidestepped, shoving him into the wall. Lyra darted toward a side alley, clutching the chip. A guard blocked her path, reaching for her arm. She twisted away, her elbow catching him in the ribs. Evan saw her cornered and charged in, his shoulder slamming into the guard to knock him aside. "Run," he shouted. They sprinted down the alley, the sound of pursuit close behind. The passage narrowed, forcing them to turn sharply into a darker lane. Ahead, a chain-link gate blocked the way. Without slowing, Evan grabbed the metal and pulled himself up, then reached down for Lyra. She passed him the chip before climbing, her hands slipping on the cold links. He hauled her over and dropped to the other side. They ran again, weaving through back streets until the noise of the guards faded. Finally, they stopped behind an abandoned cargo shed, both breathing hard. Evan leaned against the wall. "We can't go back to the shop. They'll be waiting." Lyra clutched the chip. "Then where?" "There's a council outpost in the central district," he said. "If we can get this to someone who's not in their pocket, we might have a chance." The way to the central district meant crossing busy streets and passing through neighborhoods controlled by the family's men. They moved carefully, blending into the crowd when they could. Lyra kept her hood low, her hand never leaving the chip. Evan stayed close, scanning every face around them. At one corner, a group of the family's enforcers patrolled slowly. Evan guided Lyra into a side street, only to find another pair blocking the far end. They ducked into a small repair shop, pretending to browse until the patrol passed. The shopkeeper eyed them suspiciously, muttering about troublemakers, but didn't call anyone. When they finally reached the council building, the tall glass doors reflected the pale morning light. Evan pushed them open and stepped inside, the air smelling of metal and recycled air. A clerk looked up from behind the desk. "Can I help you?" Evan placed the chip on the counter. "This contains proof of safety violations and murder. It needs to go to someone with authority, someone who can't be bought." The clerk's expression shifted from boredom to sharp attention. "Wait here." Moments later, a council investigator arrived, a stern-faced woman in a gray uniform. She took the chip, slotting it into her reader. As the files opened, her brows drew together. "Where did you get this?" Lyra stepped forward. "My husband died because of them. They've been hunting me to keep me quiet." The investigator looked at Evan, then back to Lyra. "These reports, this is enough to put them away, but it also means they'll come harder for you now." "They already have," Evan said. Within hours, council enforcers were raiding the family's offices and seizing shipments at the docks. News of the arrests spread quickly. The city's whispers changed. People were no longer calling Lyra cursed. They were talking about corruption, about how a human had stood up to the most powerful family in the district. That evening, Evan, Lyra, and Rini returned to the shop. The front window was still boarded from the earlier attack, but the street outside felt different. Neighbors who once avoided Lyra now greeted her. Someone had left fresh bread on the doorstep. Inside, Rini ran to the counter and placed her little flower in the center again, smiling as if nothing bad had ever happened. Lyra watched her, then turned to Evan. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he said. "Just keep going. That's thanks enough." She hesitated, then added softly, "If you ever need someone to stand with you, I will." Evan glanced around the shop, now filled with the quiet hum of safety. Outside, the rain began again, washing the streets clean. He knew there would always be trouble somewhere, but for now, this corner of the city felt like hope. From a shadowed rooftop across the street, the figure who had once reported on them watched for a moment longer before turning away. The job was over, but the story of the human and the widow would keep spreading, a reminder that sometimes one act of defiance could change everything.